if you don't get integrity right, it can wreck your brand. It can destroy your career. Let's take Airbnb. I've been in the company for a couple of months. Stories started coming out online about some hosts were turning people away due to their race. And Brian looked at me and he said, Rob, Airbnb exists to connect people. Our mission is to get people out from behind their computer screens, going and traveling someplace they've never traveled before, meeting people who are different than they are. He said, so Rob, you have to understand, if this sort of bad behavior is going on through our site, we are failing as a company. If you're building a company, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, what's your purpose? Why does your company exist? And if you look at me and say, well Rob, we exist to make money, then I'm going to tell you your company's ceiling is low. I think folks will begin to realize that there are limits to that and that it can hold you back if that's all you're thinking about doing. You know, you look back at some of the great companies, you see that all of them are actually thinking about something that's bigger than money.
Welcome to Challenger X. I'm Jerome Dwight, entrepreneur and business builder with over 2 decades of experience in fintech, healthcare, e-commerce, and blockchain. Each week, I chat with trailblazers who share their bold moves that are transforming the future of business. Today, I sat down with Rob Chestnut, former chief ethics officer at Airbnb and a veteran executive of eBay. He's also the author of the book Intentional Integrity, advocating for leaders to challenge the status quo while upholding strong ethical values. We talked about balancing profit with purpose and ethics, and how the best businesses are those that prioritize doing the right thing over the legal thing. Rob shared some fascinating stories that I know you'll love. So let's go. Okay, Rob Chestnut, we are delighted to have you on the show. And I've been looking forward to this episode because you've got such an interesting journey in corporate, legal, and then ethics. I want to unpack a lot of the work you've been doing with some of the most notable companies out there in technology. You are somewhat of an advocate and spokesperson for ethics and integrity in the workplace. So I want to get right into it. Can you define integrity in the workplace for us?
Sure, and it's not easy. Jerome, one of the issues with integrity is that everyone has their own definition of integrity. I think we can agree that things like lying, cheating, and stealing, that's bad and off limits, but a lot of things are gray. We all are impacted by our life experiences, the way we were raised, our religion, and therefore those things, I think, have an impact on how we see the world and how we might define integrity. And you and I might look at the same issue and come at it from different directions, and both of us with integrity disagree, which gets into the challenge, I think, a bit with integrity. So when I think of integrity in a company, I think of this idea that it's not all just about the money, because when you're thinking purely about your stock price and purely about revenue, you get very short term. And so for me, integrity is doing the right thing by your customers and your employees while obviously operating a business. And I think when you recognize that you've got obligations to other stakeholders in the way that you do business, and that you should be thinking about doing the right thing, the great news, Jerome, is that I think you actually are going to be more successful in business. It's not like you can either run a successful, profitable business or have integrity. I think that businesses that operate with integrity and think about doing the right thing over the long haul are more successful. And so that's why I'm such an advocate for it.
And I would agree that over the long term, those businesses do outperform their peers. How do you think the definition of integrity has evolved in business, especially in the technology sector?
Yeah, I think that for a long time, Jerome, I don't think people thought about integrity in business. It was almost like they were exclusive. Like, yeah, Rob, it's nice to do the right thing, but we're talking about business here. We're talking about money, and that's what it's all about. I think what's evolved is a recognition that if you don't get integrity right, it can wreck your brand. It can destroy your career. It comes with a lot of cost. And so therefore this exclusive focus on just the revenue, just the bottom line profit number to the exclusion of everything else, I think folks will begin to realize that there are limits to that, and that it can hold you back if that's all you're thinking about doing. You look back at some of the great companies of the last, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you see that all of them are actually thinking about something that's bigger than money, right? They have a purpose, they have a mission. And the purpose and mission isn't to make the most money possible, right? They define their mission very clearly in terms of what's good for the world and why their product or service is a good thing for the world. And they use that as their North Star to guide their actions. And those sorts of companies are ones that survive and thrive and do well over the long haul. And I think what we're seeing in tech is a gradual recognition that that's the right way to do business. And when you try to take shortcuts and basically ignore the law, when you start thinking about your customer, if you're thinking about only money, your success is short term, and you start to run into headwinds.
Were there some personal experiences early on, pivotal experiences that shaped your thinking around integrity and doing the right thing in business?
Well, it starts when you're young. It starts with your parents, right? It's funny. I have a memory when I was young of going to a grocery store with my mom, and I distinctly remember we're in the parking lot. My mom's got the cash money still in her hand. She looks down at her hand and then says, "We've got to go back inside." And I didn't understand, but takes me by the hand. We go back inside, and we go back to talk to the woman at the cash register. And the woman at the cash register, I'll never forget it, was surprised and thrilled. And we get back outside again, get in the car, and I asked my mom what was going on. And my mom said, "Oh, well, she gave us the wrong change. She gave me too much money, and I had to return it." And my mom explained to me that you don't keep something that's not yours. And for me, that was a really formative experience, and one that I then became determined that I would emulate in my life. So if I ever get the wrong change, or if I ever get out to my car and realize that I wasn't charged for something, we go back with my kids. And so I think it starts there. But look, throughout my time in the business world, that lesson of doing the right thing it benefits you and the company has been reinforced. Look, I was a federal prosecutor, and I prosecuted a couple of people for espionage, for example, and saw what happened when they lied and when they betrayed their country. I got to eBay, and eBay was really formative in this regard as well. My first week at eBay, it was a small company. The CEO walks into me and says, "Okay, Rob, well, welcome to eBay. Your first job is to decide what we should sell on eBay. You get to make the rules. We're a global marketplace. There are no rules right now." There were guns on the site. There were really prescription drugs and the like. So that became my job. And I created a whole infrastructure of rules and the like. But the first issue was, where do you draw the line? And the initial line I drew is, well, what's the law say everywhere? But then the law can be gray. I'll never forget the customer support team used to come to me, and I was the person that made the decision. And there would be gray things that I hadn't made rules about, the wackiest things you've ever heard, right? One day they come to me and they said, "Rob, we've got a couple of complaints. Somebody has put an item on the site, the person went to the Vatican and took communion with the Pope, and they got the wafer. And when they got the wafer from the Pope that had been blessed by the Pope, instead of putting it in their mouth, they put it in their pocket, came home and put it on eBay. And my reaction, I thought through it. I'm like, now I'm not Catholic. So my thinking on this is, well, it's legal. It's a wafer. The Pope gave it to them. They can do whatever they want with it, right? So I said, yeah, sure, go ahead. A few days later, I get called into the CEO's office, who wants to know why the Catholic Church has just announced a global boycott of eBay. And the Catholic Church's view of this was that wasn't just a wafer. That was the body of Christ that had been consecrated by the Pope. And we were selling the body of Christ. And I think I realized at that point that I don't know everything. These sorts of decisions ought to be made by a diverse group who have different life experiences and different perspectives. And that if an item is on your site, it's got your URL at the top, it's got your logo, it's got your frame, and like it or not, it really becomes your item in a way. And therefore, we started thinking a little differently about the sort of items that we might be making money from that might be legal, like a painting by a serial killer from prison, or items, German World War II uniforms, things that were very offensive to a number of people, but legal. And that's when we started, I think, looking at our business differently and thinking about what we wanted our brand to stand for.
It's quite a nuanced but important distinction between what's legal and what's right? And I want to get your perspective on, are there some companies out there that you would say are really well-run, ethical companies that you would look at and point to as a model?
Sure. I'll give you an example. Let's take Costco. I love Costco. You got a $1.50 hot dog and soda. You got the great rotisserie chicken. But you've got tremendous financial performance. I mean, go back to Warren Buffett, who invested heavily in Costco, and his partner, Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger has called Costco the perfect company. Huge investor in Costco. And when Warren Buffett sold Costco over Charlie's objection, Charlie went out and bought even more and made another killing. So one of the great financial success stories. But you start looking in a little bit deeper, and you start realizing that they operate on a different level. Take a look at their values. Value number one at Costco: we follow the law. Okay, period. That's not something that's just sort of added in. That's number one. They treat their customers extremely well. They pay their employees nicely above the market in every area, in every place that they do business. You don't see anything in their values about profit. And in fact, they intentionally refrain from making extra money where, for example, they get a great deal on a product. They could charge more, but they don't, because they believe that over the long run, if they operate with discipline and they don't try to get the largest profit they can possibly get in the short term, they'll win in the long term. They could pay their employees less, right? Mm-hmm. But they recognize that by paying more, by treating their people really well, their people will stay longer. They'll have lower turnover cost. They'll attract better people. And in the long run, the company will win. So, a company like Costco, you don't see scandals coming out of Costco because they, I think long-term, and they think about not just their investors. And obviously, if you invested in Costco, you would have done extraordinarily well. But instead of thinking about their investors, they think about their employees and their customers and doing the right thing by the law first. And then from that, great profits, right, and great returns for investors ensue. So I think Costco is just one example of a modern company that's done extraordinarily well over the years by really focusing on doing the right thing.
Mm. Great example. A lot of the viewers of the show are young entrepreneurs who are building incredible businesses around the world. And a lot of them may be asking, hey, I am building a company for profit. Does that make me unethical? Right? I'd love for you to respond to that.
No. Well, let's start with something. If you're building a company, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, what's your purpose? What's your mission? Why does your company exist? And if you look at me and say, well Rob, we exist to make money, then I'm going to tell you that your company's ceiling is low. If that's what drives you, you're constantly going to be buffeted back and forth and very short term in your thinking. Money is a poor master. And if you look at the great companies didn't become great, and they didn't make great successes out of their investors by focusing on money. Over and over again, the great companies start with a purpose. Why is what they're doing good for the world? They use that as their North Star. Now, of course, you've got to be thinking about money. Of course, you've got to be looking at your bottom line, and you've got to be smart. But you can't let money drive all of your decisions. You have to figure out, and let me give you an example. Let's take Airbnb. Airbnb, when I was the general counsel at Airbnb, and I've been the company for a couple of months, and stories started coming out online about the fact that Airbnb guests, some were being discriminated against based on the color of their skin. Some hosts were turning people away due to their race. And I think initially, the company kind of looked at it and said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. That's true." But the story started to grow, and we took a look at it, and we started to see statistically that there was an issue. And then the lawsuits started coming in, class action, right? California Department of Fair Housing. And so I did what any general counsel would do. I went off and did my legal research. What is Airbnb's legal responsibility? Is Airbnb legally liable if there are some hosts who are discriminating, maybe even subconsciously discriminating? And then, do federal laws even apply to a rental site like Airbnb? And so I get my research done. I go sit down and talk to Brian Chesky, the founder. I start going through the law. Brian holds up his hand and says, "Wait a minute, Rob, I don't care." I said, "Wait a minute, what do you mean you don't care?" And Brian looked at me and he said, "Rob, Airbnb exists to connect people. Our mission is to get people out from behind their computer screens, going and traveling someplace they've never traveled before, meeting people who are different than they are, interacting with them." He said, "So, Rob, you have to understand, if this sort of bad behavior is going on through our site, we are failing as a company, and I don't care what the numbers say." And he said, "So, Rob, you go off and deal with the legal stuff, but we're going to fix this because we have to." And that's the sort of thinking, I think, that permeates great companies. You look at what your mission is, and you make the big decisions based on what is needed to make you successful vis-a-vis the mission. Money falls from that after that, right? There's a wonderful company, Moderna, and they're in the healthcare field. And their founder used to say, medicine is for the people, not the profits. And the better we have remembered this, the more profits we have made. Okay? So Henry Ford, his mission was to democratize the automobile. And he said, "We're going to pay the people who work for me well, and we're going to make a profit." But he said, but not too much profit. Because the bigger thing for him was accomplishing that big mission. And if you focus on the big mission and doing right by the mission, the money comes.
It's, not not making too much profit is not something I hear about on a business podcast. So you're clearly challenging conventional wisdom on the pursuit of profit as a business. Do you get much resistance from business communities when they hear you talk about maybe not deprioritizing profit, but elevating maybe some other things to the discussion?
Well, that's just it. I never tell a business that we shouldn't worry about money. Of course, you got to worry about money. But what I'm suggesting is that you take a longer view. You think about your customers and your employees and your mission, and that's ultimately the path to becoming financially successful. So I'm not trying to, in a sense, I'm not really challenging the conventional wisdom. I'm speaking the language that we all want to see a financially successful company. The problem is if you are only focused on the money all the time in all of your decisions, ironically, you won't be nearly as financially successful as you could be.
If you could look back at your time at Airbnb, eBay, two incredibly successful tech giants, really, what were some of your biggest ethical challenges that you had to navigate through during those years?
Sure. Oh, there are lots of them. Look, Jerome, one of the things that I tell people who are in businesses, you've got ethical challenges every day. Your employees are running up against them all the time. And if you aren't thinking about them, then you're missing a lot of important points. Look, eBay had them all the time, right? What should eBay be doing around items that are controversial, right? Like the German World War II uniforms. What should eBay's responsibility be around counterfeit goods that may be put on the site? At Airbnb, for example, we found out that white supremacists were planning to stay in Airbnbs in Charlottesville, Virginia, during their demonstrations, the famous demonstrations that took place in Charlottesville. What's our responsibility there? Do we take the position and say, well, they can, we're not supporting their views. If they happen to stay in an Airbnb, they happen to stay in an Airbnb. Or do we say, that isn't what we stand for, and therefore tell them that they are not welcome and cancel the reservations, which is ultimately what Airbnb did. The ethical, what do you do when an Airbnb is trashed? I mean, one of the earliest stories that Brian likes to talk about at Airbnb was a host who had their place trashed by a renter, came back, found that the place had been ransacked and destroyed. And initially, the host went on the site to complain and talk about the problems. And Brian was sympathetic, but it was still a pretty small company. What do you do, right? And the controversy grew. And it got to the point where Brian recognized that this was kind of a make or break moment for the company. So we went to the board and said to the board, I think we have to implement an insurance program for hosts. What about $5,000? And the board looked at him and said, add a zero. And they implemented it at 50, and ultimately today it's $1 million. And I think Brian recognized that by standing behind hosts who are on your platform, making you successful, standing behind them when something bad like this happens, it's the right thing to do. But moreover, it creates an environment where the host trusts Airbnb. More people are likely to get involved in Airbnb because they know there's protection that Airbnb offers. So ultimately, it makes the company more financially successful again. It gets back to this idea when you think about problems from perspectives other than today's financial numbers and start looking at the bigger picture and making decisions according to that lens. ultimately it drives more business. I think one of the reasons Airbnb is so successful is it recognized that it should take on some obligation here and it should help out.
Okay. We're seeing the era of AI in a lot of hyper growth companies that are being fueled by AI. The company I run and co-founded, Boomerang, just recorded 8,000% growth globally. So for companies like that and their CEOs, where you're growing globally very rapidly, how do you scale integrity as the business scales, and that DNA of integrity of doing the right thing when you're growing so fast?
Well, I mean, part of it is you talk about it. I mean, so many places leaders don't even talk about integrity. They don't recognize that it has anything to do with their business. They simply say, I don't care how you get it done, just get it done, right? We've got to move fast and take advantage of the business opportunity. And that's all fine and good. I think that that leaders, great leaders, take time to talk about integrity. And they take time to recognize that there are aspects of their business that have integrity issues. And they think about them and try to incorporate doing the right thing with doing business, recognizing that it's part of their obligation. And I think those the people who are really, I think, smart leaders, have some foresight, take the time to drive it into how they operate. And I think too many leaders simply never talk about it.
Now, you are the author of Intentional Integrity: How Smart Companies Can Lead an Ethical Revolution. A fantastic title. I am in the middle of reading it, and it's just power-packed with incredible insights. And for me, it really speaks to young leaders about the importance of leading with integrity. How would you speak to some of the next generation of leaders building companies, and what are some of the biggest ethical dilemmas you feel they're facing today?
Well, I think every business has unique ethical challenges. I mean, some businesses, for example, it's around sourcing. Where am I getting my goods? How are the people being treated who make the goods? What is the impact of my business on the environment? Are there aspects of my business that are hurting third parties, and how am I addressing that? Look, I think it's up to each company to look at their business, to identify who the stakeholders are beyond just their investors, and to identify trouble points, issues, ethical issues that are raised by the business. Jerome, there's no business that doesn't leave some mark on the earth somehow, right? And I think they're recognizing what mark you make and thinking about how you can reduce the negative impact of your business, I think will ultimately pay off for you in the long run. But look, I think looking at your business model and really questioning, like a social media company has to seriously question, what kind of an impact is my social media site having on people? Is it having a negative impact on young people? And so when you don't think about it and you just drive forward and drive ahead, you start running into headwinds. Like, social media is now outlawed in Australia for 16 and under, right? Because I think people didn't think enough about the negative impact that the business might have on younger people. Growth was great for a little while, and now you're going to start facing regulatory headwinds that will ultimately hurt you in the long run. Some of it is just how you treat others in the office. I've looked quite a bit at things like sexual harassment. Should a leader be engaged in romantic relationships with someone at the office? Should you be hosting parties and serving a lot of booze at at your office parties? What kind of an environment are you creating? And if you aren't thoughtful about it, what you might be doing is creating an environment that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, where issues can occur that we've seen over and over again. You end up in the headlines. I've seen leaders that I've worked with personally have their careers destroyed by really not thinking about how they treat people and setting a standard for how they're going to behave in the office.
Okay, as we kind of wrap up, I want to talk about AI, and it's sort of growing in leaps and bounds in our everyday lives. And how do you think of the impact of AI both today and into the future when it comes to the world of ethics and integrity and so forth?
Well, there's a lot of good can come from it. AI is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used beneficially, or it can be used in a way that's more reckless and potentially destructive or negative. Look, it's well documented that AI has issues around intellectual property that are now, because there's been such a gold rush in this area, the courts are going to be getting involved, right? Business often outpaces regulation in terms of its speed. So courts are going to be getting involved, and that may put some limits on it. What sort of an impact is it having on the environment? Well documented the amount of energy that it takes. So in my mind, those that benefit from AI have to be thinking about how to reduce the negative footprint that their business may have. If you don't think about it, ultimately, the world will force you to look at it, and that will ultimately hurt your business. You also have to recognize that there have been injustices or wrongs in the past about look, the way that minorities or women have been treated. And if all of the data you're using incorporates prejudices and biases from the past, you are simply perpetuating them in the AI models that you're building. Who's building the model? And is anyone taking time in the process of building the model to think about how to make sure that you're not perpetuating past problems? So those are just some of the issues that I think need to be thought about while we are racing ahead with the development of AI.
And the last question I have for you, Rob, is we always ask our audience to think about the future in your perspective, in your unique position as an ethics, really a voice in the corporate world. How would you define a ethical challenger?
Well, an ethical challenger, I think, is someone that speaks up and insists that ethics be on the table for business, right? Someone who raises their hand and has the courage to say that we've got to be thinking about these issues while we are growing the business. And that takes courage. And that isn't always the way things are done. But I think the people that say that have that courage are doing the business a tremendous amount of good and ultimately doing the right thing for shareholders. So for me, a challenger is someone who isn't afraid to step back at a business problem or a business angle and simply ask the question, say, what are the ethical implications of what we're doing here? And if we think about it and try to build integrity into what we're doing, will it actually make us a stronger, better, more profitable company in the long run?
Rob Chestnut, great way to end the show. Thank you so much. Very inspiring, and we appreciate the time you took to join us on the Challenger podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jerome. I appreciate it.